Joining us right now via Zoom chat all the way from sunny California is Alex Marlow. He is the editor-in-chief at Breitbart, praise be to God. He is also the author of a book called Breaking the News, Exposing the Establishment Media's Hidden Deals and Secret Corruption, a book that I went through a couple of weeks ago on my trip to Baltimore and absolutely loved it. Alex, welcome to the program. Thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's really nice to have a reach out from the religious community. I'm a very active conservative, but I'm more of a passive Catholic. I do go to Catholic church, and I did my reconciliation last weekend, so I'm feeling very fresh.
Praise be to God. Fresh out of the confessional. I love that. This is going to be a great conversation. I really loved your book for a number of reasons. I felt it was it's the thing you really wanted as a conservative, especially in media. You're like, oh, yes, preach it, yes. So there was so many points along this, listening to your book, because I did go through the audio version, which you narrated, where I wanted to pause it and really expand on those points. And so let me start with this question, which is a personal one, if that's okay. You really touched on your relationship to your dad and how that impacted your work. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's really nice of you to say. My dad actually works for me at Breitbart, and he's our evening editor. He covers the front page for us in the evening. But I was very blessed to have an incredibly solid father figure growing up. And this is something that has been largely one of my secret weapons. He's just been a good man his whole life. And he introduced me to the Catholic Church, he introduced me to conservative values. And he never did this in a way that was, where he insulted my intelligence. He always built up my ability to solve problems and to draw my own conclusions, but he also provided support and warmth and that really good underpinning in terms of values. He was just always a decent person. He never was in any trouble, and he always did the right things by his family and by his coworkers and by his employees when he had a small business. And I just always drew off of that. And it's interesting because I like to think of myself as a pretty nice guy. He was even a much kinder guy, or is a much kinder guy than I am. And I just get so many values straight from him, but he also never backed down on anything. I never saw him whimper. I never saw him back off of a fight that needed to be made. He's also very iconoclastic. His decisions that he makes are always ultimately the individual is the champion, and he's got guiding lights. He's well read and would bring me to church, etc. But he would always make up his own mind too and carve his own path. So it's just the perfect set of values to have from a father. And without that, I certainly wouldn't be nearly as far along in my life as I am.
Praise be to God for that. I love that he had a big, impactful role in you, and that you included him or touched upon him in your book. So let's talk about the book more in particular here.
Sure.
The title is called Breaking News, Exposing the Establishment Media's Hidden Deals and Secret Corruption, published by Simon & Schuster. And you cover the big stories over the last couple of years, fake news, 1619, racism, BLM and Antifa, MAGA, and Never Trumpers, and the election results, and so much more. What made you want to write this book, and what did you hope to get out of it?
Yeah, there's two things that made me want to write it, I would say. Is first of all, just the life goal of I've always wanted to write a book, sort of something on my bucket list, so to speak. And it seemed like the timing was pretty good. And then it just seemed like the timing for my life. I was at home quite a bit because we were about to have my second son. And it just seemed like a good time. Those quiet evenings are the best time to kind of write. And I felt very good about my discipline. I thought I could get it done. And then when I thought of a topic that really spoke to me, I didn't think there had been a really good comprehensive book on all of the fake news that came out in the Trump era. And regardless of people's opinion of President Trump at this time, it was totally unprecedented. And, I lived through some of the horrific attacks on Breitbart, which were dishonest. And I recall, of course, what the media did to Sarah Palin and all these things that were just so horrible. But what they were doing to Trump was truly amazing, but there was something new about the way they were attacking Trump, is they were attacking his supporters. The media was also going after the people who were behind Trump's rise, and they weren't doing it from a liberal-leaning sort of way. They really weaponized. The fake news was weaponized against Trump and his supporters. And so I took on a research project. I hired a first-class researcher who's on loan to me from Peter Schweitzer's shop, the Government Accountability Institute. And we started to dig into some of the business relationships behind the media, because I noticed that clearly they're not just trying to get ratings anymore. There's something else going on. And that's exactly what we found, is that we found that the media is essentially the front person. They're the person who's the Walmart greeter, so to speak, for a gigantic conglomerate. And these conglomerates often have business overseas, particularly in China. And the media is just trying to keep the public focused on stuff so that the conglomerate can thrive. Take NBC, which is part of NBC Universal, and ABC, which is ABC Disney. These all have news divisions, but they don't really need to thrive. They just need to exist and protect the corporate status quo.
And we saw that, and you actually talk about this in the book. Time and time again, they're reading from the same script. Local outlets, national outlets, they're all saying the exact same words, like as if they're reading from a script about the same stories. It is mind-boggling that most people don't pick up on this. And when you talk about it, it's like, golly gee whiz, why isn't America paying attention?
Yeah, to connect the first two topics you brought up, I mean, with my dad, I learned to be an individual. And, there are places we can get your values that the collective should get their values from. I mean, I'm thinking of the Bible and the founding documents in particular. But ultimately, you got to be an individual. And that's what I loved about Andrew Breitbart, our founder, and so many of my heroes growing up in a more iconoclastic age. And then you see the way the media operates, and it's as a collective. And they operate with everyone agrees on the same thing. They all, and I recall when I was just really getting to become a news junkie in college, I felt like I would read the same article 19 times. I'd read the Washington Post version and the New York Times version, the Associated Press's version, and local news' version. It was all the same article. And that was what drew me to Breitbart to begin with, is that just because the media concludes something is accurate, it doesn't necessarily make it accurate. It means that's their narrative. And this is something that played out throughout the book, is that the media outlets almost always got the same stories wrong in the same direction. The Jussie Smollett hoax, the Covington hoax, the Kavanaugh hoax. And anytime someone would pop out of line, they would get popped back into place. And it's truly disgraceful. But regardless of my judgment of that disgrace, I think just writing about it and clearly spelling out this is what is happening and here's why it needed to be done.
I love history, and in my free time, I go through history books mostly. When the pandemic hit and the lockdown started, I sat there at the house and I went through the Boston Massacre again. And I went through some of the history books and some of the biographies. And then I went and actually looked up original newspaper articles about the event in the Pennsylvania Gazette and others. They were all the same article. Sam Adams and Paul Revere worked together to distribute the same article. So this is not even a new technique. It's been around a long time.
No, exactly. And the only thing that's really changed to me is that now the agenda was so corporate. Now the agenda was so much about advancing the goals of ABC Disney, which is, doing lots of business in China, opening theme parks in China, selling Disney movies to China, and NBC, Comcast, Universal, the same business. It's theme parks and it's movie distribution, and is not just the news. And they're all buying each other, and any of the upstart left-wing media outlets all get gobbled up. And these billionaires are in control, and to really police them, to really be their watchdog, means that they're not going to hire you in the future also. So it's kind of not a great career move for a journalist who's making, $70,000 a year to start really attacking the biggest billionaires on the planet. It's just not good business for you. And someone needed to put this out, point this out in book form, I thought, and luckily I got to be the first to do it.
I've always heard, there was a time period where journalism was this like pure thing, when everything was beautiful and wonderful. And then the yellow journalism came in, but then we prevailed over yellow journalism. And then now we're here. It seems like that's not a very true narrative. What is the truth about how these historically looking at it over time, what journalism was like?
Yeah, you've nailed it. And my colleague, Mark Levin, who's on the SiriusXM Patriot channel with me and is a good friend and has been a great supporter of this book, he wrote a book called Unfreedom of the Press. I think it was in 2018. We have the same exact publisher, which basically laid out the full history. And you have no idea how right you are. I mean, it's every era has basically been the same thing, where some of the best journalists are doing so because they've got an agenda. The perceived neutrality tends to not be a great formula for great journalism. A lot of the time, great journalism comes from a partisan place. But what changed, I think, recently is then it became less about journalism and more just purely about narrative setting and lying. And that might be newer, though of course there was a lot of lying in the past. I apologize for my doggies. It's a happy office environment here. But it is a total misnomer that journalism's ever been particularly neutral. And I think one of the things that bothers all of us, particularly in the Breitbart newsroom, so much lately is that they keep lying to us and they won't come clean and tell us they have a perspective. CNN will never tell you they have a perspective, nor will even the New York Times opinion page. They think that that's a center collection of opinions. In my opinion, we will give you our exact perspective at Breitbart. I'll tell you it's a populist, conservative, pro-Judeo-Christian website, and we're going to be selecting stories and writing stories with that frame of mind. Now, we want to be truthful first, but you do know you are getting our slant on it, and that's, I think, okay and should be encouraged.
And so, and further to that point, I just graduated from a communications department, and in our journalistic ethics classes, they kind of drill in your head about bias and these kind of things. And more, I'm realizing it seems as though it's nonsense. Is it actually a good thing to be not biased? And I feel like, as you were saying a second ago, sometimes it's even better to just lay out your bias and just plainly be honest, and then move forward in that direction. How do you see it?
Yeah, great question. Let me be crystal clear. Bias is inevitable. And people who act like they're so neutral, that's almost like having some sort of a God complex. Like you are not, just to relate to this audience, I mean, we're all sinners, and then we go from there. We don't start from we're pristine. And if you think I'm not pristine, then you're being too judgmental. And no, that's not the starting point. And somehow in our media that we've concluded that, if someone at CNN says something, that might be some sort of a neutral baseline. Of course it's not. They might think of it that way, but it's not. They're coming into it with their biases and their producers' biases and their bosses' biases. So bias is inevitable. So I'm 100% in the camp. State it flat out, say where you're coming from, and let people judge you accordingly. This was the motto of Andrew Breitbart, our founder. So it is, I'm not commenting on whether or not it's good or bad at biases. We all have them. I think it is dishonest fundamentally to act as though you're impartial. And that is what the vast majority of our media does. And I think they're suffering incredibly with their credibility because of it.
Alex Marlow is our guest. He is the editor-in-chief at Breitbart. He also is the author of a new book that came out not all that long ago called Breaking News: Exposing the Establishment Media's Hidden Deals and Secret Corruption, published by Simon & Schuster. We're going to link to it, of course. It wasn't all that long ago, Alex, when we were stuck with the main outlets like, New York Times or The Post or ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, those types of things. Now we have Breitbart, we have so many others, but we live in an age of incredible censorship, which is why I still love radio. I'm an old school radio guy. I love radio. It lets me say things and have conversations that I'm not allowed to have on digital platforms. How is it to try to continue to keep the platform alive, the audience engaged, when you have everyone against you and they don't want to give you an opportunity?
You're speaking exactly my language. I am very negative on social media. They get a lot of my energy in the book because I think all the major social media conglomerates are much more concerned with censorship than they are with actually allowing people to exercise their fundamental First Amendment rights. And I think that this is something that is it's something we've all sort of accepted, but many of us are still playing along. I, for one, find it very hard to play along. At Breitbart, we're very big on all the major social media platforms, and we put effort into it because we want to reach those people. But on a personal level, I'm 100% with you. I'm a radio guy. I'm on radio. I love being on radio. I love listening to radio. I love the new podcast medium. It's a terrific new medium. And I like that we have our website where we can write articles and no one can really bother us over there. And we try to be as truthful as possible because our credibility with our audience matters. We try to be as fun as possible because we want you to enjoy yourself when you're there. But ultimately what Facebook and Twitter does is not a huge deal to us. And that's really important because we are in the censorship age. And with social media controlled by the same groups of people, unelected, very rich, far leftists who live in Silicon Valley, who are largely anonymous to us, we have to assume they're going to be censoring the same types of content. And it does seem to be, pro-conservative content. And that's why my focus is on platforms like radio, where you have a full conversation, people can have their full piece, they can have a fleshed out thought, and you can say things without all the nitpicking that goes on places like Twitter.
But in the book, you talk about how your traffic was severely hampered by Google not letting you be in the top search results on page 1. And then the ads situation became precarious for you. How did you guys get past all of that?
Yeah, well, we got past all of it. Luckily for us, it's about size. I mean, we're so big that we're able to survive just being lean and mean and actually thrive being lean and mean. But yeah, Google does immeasurable damage to our business because they take content that would normally appear on their first page from Breitbart, and they make it so that it doesn't appear at all if we hit on a subject matter that they don't like, for example, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It's very hard to get search results in Google. In fact, it's impossible for you to search for Joe Biden for a Breitbart article. Unless you type in the word Breitbart, if you search for Joe Biden, you can scroll back a billion pages, you'll never get a Breitbart article. And that's because they manually censor it. It's not an algorithm, it's manually censored. And Facebook treats us as a second tier publisher. A lot of people in the company have tried to treat us like worse. They want us banned, but luckily we've been able to at least survive there. And Twitter uses a tool called shadow banning, which diminishes our reach. All of this does big damage to our business. And I believe that it also makes it hard to get advertising because a lot of people try to frame us as some sort of a toxic website, which we're not. But luckily, due to our sheer size, we've been able to weather it. But I still think it's important to talk about it because the next Breitbart might not come out and might not exist because of this phenomenon where it is so discouraging as a conservative business to start knowing that the Silicon Valley tech giants are going to be using their resources and ideological forces to try to suppress you, which they do across the board.
We have just a few minutes left with Alex Marlow, the author of Breaking News by Simon & Schuster. Great book. Highly recommend it. It was a joy to go through. I almost feel like I kind of wish you'd have waited a few more extra months to publish because there were some big stories that have come out right after you've published. I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse alone might have been worth the wait. Jesse Smollett, I mean, good grief. What else would you have put in there if you'd have had the opportunity?
Well, Rittenhouse has got to be first. That's going to be a really big one. There will be a paperback, and I know I'm going to have my hands full picking and choosing. What happened with January 6th, which I hated what happened on January 6th, but the fact that we're still obsessed with it, it's just, what happened to one Trump supporter got killed by law enforcement. It was a very bad day. It was not one of the worst days in American history. I think a lot of the people, there's no massive movement behind it. It's over. We don't have to talk about it every day, and yet that's what the media insists. But the one that's really interesting is how so much of the media insisted there would be no inflation, or as we call the Breitbart, the Biden inflation. In a Breitbart, we've been writing for 6 months that inflation is here, it's gonna be a massive problem. And then all of a sudden, the media seemed to realize 2 weeks ago that inflation's here, and now it's the biggest issue in the country. Of course, the media's been so dishonest about the coronavirus, which I have a whole chapter on that, but that's only gotten worse. I mean, the list really goes on. Oh, how about Facebook just yesterday admitting that their definition of a fact is their opinion? They said it's our protected opinion when they're doing a fact check. These are massive
you're not
stores,
allowed to have a protected opinion. They are, but you're not.
Exactly. My facts are not protected opinion, but their protected opinion is now a fact. That's so insane that we're living through this. And I'm going to have to figure out a way to get all that in the paperback when we do it.
It's going to become a lot bigger. Maybe a 3-volume set. Who knows?
I'm in.
Now, okay, I want to look at the coming years. Do you think it's still possible for independent voices to build and to grow? And a minute ago, we were talking about old school radio, but we're living in a digital age, whether we like it or not. That is where we have to plant our seeds. Is it possible, as Facebook, as you just mentioned, has stacked the deck against us and limits the conversations? We have been struck many times by YouTube for talking about the vaccines or for politics or what have you. We are being shadow banned on Facebook right now and on Twitter and other places. How is it going to be possible? Having a website that's great and all, that's wonderful, but how do we leverage these digital platforms, and can we still build even
Yeah,
in
great
2022?
question. And I think, unfortunately, the plan, the process has got to be a little painful for a lot of people, like you and I, who I'm sure we're of the mindset we would love to be as Big Ten as possible. We're actually not hating the people who disagree with us. We would love to talk to them more. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be creating our own ecosystem, but stating that the principles behind it are actual ideological diversity, that we're not going to censor you. And so we will build our own stuff, our own Facebooks, our own Twitters, our own YouTubes. And, it seems like Rumble is becoming a good YouTube alternative. So that's the first thing. Trump's going to start a social media company. And I think that you start with that and then you grow from there with more conservative businesses that cater to those audiences that are on those platforms. But then hopefully people who continue to get censored from those other platforms, that they see, wait a minute, these guys over here aren't so bad. They're not as mean. They're not as horrible as people say they are. And in fact, they will allow for me to be there and get my ideas out there on that platform in the spirit of free speech. I think that's sort of the process, and I do think that's our best chance.
Speaking of big tents, I was thinking about that conservative or libertarian university that they're trying to set up in Austin, Texas. And the idea of this kind of idea sounds nice in theory, but my fear of this, and also having a big tent in terms of conservative media, is whenever you erase borders, you cease to be anything at all. And we see that in the U.S. physically, but also ideologically. Should we allow this kind of big tent ideas inside of our, the Breitbart, Daily Wire, Guadalupe Radio Network? Is it right to have such a large tent?
I think it is, but I do think you have to let the best ideas win. And occasionally when an idea has emerged as a clear winner, you don't need to spend all day, every day talking about the rest of the ideas. And the border is a perfect example. This is one where the majority of Republicans even were probably pretty open border 10 years ago. And then when Trump came down that escalator, all of a sudden it was kind of a mixed issue. And now it's pretty settled science that we want a secure border. I mean, that's a 90% plus issue. So I used to do on my radio show on Sirius XM 3 hours of immigration, routinely 3-hour shows all on immigration. I don't have to do that anymore. People get it. There's not a lot of people tuning in who want an open border. So I do think letting the cream rise to the top and the best ideas win is the approach. I'm very interested in this in Austin University thing because I'm afraid that if they feel like the key to success is to cancel other voices and to actually be censors in their own right, I'm wondering if they're going to take that bait, because a lot of people involved, I think, are actually subtly pro-censorship. They just don't like the censorship that the New York Times does. So I'm curious to see where that goes from there. But, if it works out, that sounds good.
Last question. One of the most fascinating chapters of your book, Breaking News, was on Bloomberg and China.
One of my favorites.
I mean, media, celebrities, athletes, there's all kinds of people selling out to China. This is a major problem for the world, I would say. Our Lady warned us in 1917 against communism that would spread across the world, and I think we're seeing that right now. Do you see that infection getting worse or better as we move forward?
Thank you for bringing this up, because a lot of the stuff that's really fun to talk about on talk radio is reliving some of the horrible things the media did and dunking on them. But some of the research I'm most proud of is in sections like the Bloomberg section, where I do a lot of original reporting, where I went through communist Chinese documents to try to see the depth of the entanglement between Michael Bloomberg and his empire and the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing. And it's way over the top. I broke in the book exclusive photos of Bloomberg executives routinely meeting with literally the ministers of propaganda in Beijing. And coincidentally, they do this just about every 2 years when their licensure agreements come up. And Bloomberg has more access to the Chinese market than any other news outlet in the United States. It is literally the biggest in terms of distribution in China, and they need it because Bloomberg has this thing called terminals, which is basically a monopoly in terms of distribution of business news on Wall Street. They're very expensive to get, and this has made Bloomberg an incredibly rich man. About $50 billion is his estimated net worth, and he relies on access to the Chinese market to get this level of information. And so there's a lot of butt kissing that's going on. So if you think a guy like that who wanted to be president and cuts 9-figure checks to the Democrat establishment, if he thinks on his watch the Democrat Party is going to be remotely tough on China, you're living in a dream world. He never will be if he's president or not, with a guy like that with so much clout. And that's why he talks a big game on climate change, but he defends China, which is building coal-fired power plants right now. And when you see that his whole business model, or a huge portion of it, is 100% controlled by China re-upping those agreements every 2 years, all of a sudden the whole picture starts coming together.
Well, we are out of time. Alex Marlow, editor-in-chief of Breitbart, thank you for your time today. Author of Breaking News, Exposing the Establishment Media's Hidden Deals and Secret Corruption. We're going to link to it. I highly encourage you to pick this up. It's a great book. Alex, thank you again. God bless you. God love you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure, and I appreciate all the thoughtful questions about the book.